Okay, hi everyone, welcome back to part 2 of week 9. I'm going to go through this quite quickly because I know that you can watch it over and over again. But what I wanted to do was to just give you a run through of the way that I would go about beginning this final assignment. So the first thing I would do is that I would look at what the essay or the question is asking me to do. What is the question? I'm being asked to compare and contrast two artworks to demonstrate how contemporary art helps us to think about the future. So I can reword that and I can think, how does artwork 1 plus artwork 2 help us, all of us, think about the future? So it's a very simple, very small essay. You've only got 1,500 words to do this. So the first thing to do is to go back through everything that you've done so far this session and think, which two artworks? Are there two artworks that immediately come to mind in terms of thinking about the future? Are there two works that you talked about in your lexicon entries? Are there works that you included in your catalogue for your exhibition? Which two do you think you can do an extended study on to help us really consider this idea of the future? So what I would do would then be to think, okay, what I really have to narrow down to is two artworks that can help me think about the future. And for this sample essay, for this sample kind of thinking through, I've chosen two works. I've chosen a work by Tracy Moffat called My Horizon, which was a video installation, a video and photographic installation at the 2017 Venice Biennale. I've chosen it because it's got lots of variety and lots of things that I can do with it. The installation was 2 series of photographs and 2 videos, so I can kind of work with a number of different things in the work to try and pull out this notion of the future. In the work, Moffat appropriated imagery from Hollywood films and put these alongside newly staged scenes of migration and of refugees arriving or not being allowed to arrive. So there's kind of a political edge which I'm particularly interested in that I might take forward if this was me writing this essay. So the first thing I would do would be to think clearly about this work and think, okay, so what are some key words or key concepts that I might be able to connect to this work? And just even based on my brief description that I just gave you, there's kind of the idea of journey, there's the idea of displacement, there's the idea of loss and of longing. So I might start drawing myself a little bit of a mind map that sort of has Tracy Moffat's work and has those keywords. Alongside it, for my imaginary essay, I would put this work because it's one of my favourites and I've written about it before. So I'm drawing on information and knowledge that I have. The work is by New Zealand Māori artist Lisa Rehana. It was also installed actually at the Venice Biennale in 2017. It was recently seen here up at Campbelltown. And it's just one of those works that for me just keeps giving. There's just more and more that I can write about and think about in relation to the work. So what I'm challenging myself to do with this work then is to talk about it alongside another work that I haven't written about before. So how can I put the Lisa Rehana's In Pursuit of Venus alongside Tracy Moffat's My Horizon? And how do I put those two together to help me think about the future? So with Rehana's work, there's this kind of metaphor that goes through the whole work about looking through new lenses. And the work is making a kind of new kind of image which is available for future generations. But there's also this sort of undercurrent about colonization, the arrival of the tall ships into the Pacific brought with it the very infection that she's talking about, but the infections of colonization. So I can think about these two artworks discretely, but what the essay is asking me to do is to think about them together in order to think about the future. So what keywords can I use to help me think about the future in relation to these works, and what keywords connect the artworks? And it's at this point that I really start scribbling things out on paper and kind of mapping the two works together with the keywords. But in addition to that, I'm trying to pull out some themes. I'm trying to pull out some clear ideas that I could use to write an essay. So to do that, I need to go back to the works and I need to do some research on the works. So I find a website, which for contemporary artworks are useful places to find the voice of the artist. And here Tracy Moffat is talking about the fact that she's taken her camera into unknown locations and made photo dramas using models, actors and people. This is the same kind of approach that Reihana has taken, but actually that's not what I'm interested in talking about these works. So they share something, but I'm going to put that to the side. She says my stories meld fiction, fact and some aspects of family history, but I'm going to extend the filmic narrative into imaginary realms. This is something I'm a little more interested in, because this sort of extension into the imaginary is something I might be able to use if I was to write an essay about looking at the future. So I start to think, okay, extension into the imaginary, the horizon itself as a place of escape, and possibly as the future. So you can see how I'm starting to think these two artworks together. And again, I return to the question. What is the question asking me to do? This critical essay asks you to consider the future through the lens of contemporary art. So looking at the two practices that they share isn't really going to help me talk about the future. It's going to help me talk about them as artists, but not this kind of bigger picture of the future. So I need an angle, I need an argument, I need a perspective. The easiest way to do that is to rewrite the topic as a research question. So here I am, I've given it a go. How do Lisa Reihana's Pursuit of Venus Infected and Tracy Moffat's My Horizon present new lenses for thinking about colonisation and migration? Suddenly I've got a research topic, I've got an essay that I can start to write. So I'm going to be thinking about new lenses, I'm going to be thinking about colonisation and migration and how this points us into some kind of concept of the future that is maybe reworking of some of the displacements of the past. So I feel like I'm starting to get to a topic. And this whole process has maybe taken me a couple of weeks to get to here, choosing my works, connecting them together. So what would I do next? Next, I would spend some time doing the research. This time, I would be looking at what other people have written about these works. If I can't find any other writing on the artworks, I would put the artworks aside and find new works. And this is critical because you need to know what other people have written and how they have written, and how you can use that and add to the existing literature. So here's an article about Lisa Reihana's work that talks about how she returns the gaze of imperialism, and that she sort of creates this immersive cinematic experience by disrupting previous notions of beauty, authenticity, history, and myth. So this person's writing using keywords, but they're not the same as mine. But I can use them to start to think about, okay, if she's disrupting history, then by disrupting history, maybe we can also disrupt the future. So I start to get an idea of how I might put these together. I start thinking about, well, who are the writers and authors in the great big list of writers and authors that we have for the subject? Are there any of them who can help me? So I go back through the list of readings, everything that we've looked at over this semester. And I think, okay, T.J. Demos is talking about decolonisation in nature. Hito Stau has this kind of video and image thing. There's texts in there on ruins. There's contemporary art. There's colonialism and ethnography. I think I can draw on these 6 essays. It's more than enough. But they're not really giving me the angle on the future that I want. So I'm going to have to look more broadly. I find a great essay by Patricia Mellencamp on Tracy Moffat. It's an older essay, it's from the 90s, but it will help me kind of contextualize Moffat's work and think about how that can be pulled into the future. And again, it's about history. So I can start using this idea of histories of the future and the ways that we might move forward. I find another essay that's more broadly, that's using Lisa Reihana's work to talk about the idea of the Pacific and the idea of artists in the Pacific. And for me, this is a really important touchstone for thinking about these two works together. What does it mean to be making art in Australia and New Zealand and the Pacific? That can be kind of a subtext that I can feed through my essay. So I've got my artworks, I've found the voice of the artists, I've understood what they're doing, I've found other people talking explicitly about the works, and I've found other people talking and writing about kind of the broader concept. Now I can start putting the whole thing together. So I return to the question again, but this time I bring the works with me. So I think about the way that Tracy Moffat talks about the horizon line in her work, and the way that the horizon line, she says, can represent the far and distant future or the unobtainable. And I think about, well, maybe that's a way of thinking about the future, that the future is unobtainable, and that these works are sort of showing me some images and some ways to think about moving towards what I cannot attain. And I think about the way that Lisa Reihana talks about the way that her work unravels the Enlightenment, that she really is pushing against history and certain fixed ideas, and that she's wanting to really make us think about a new future, a new way of operating inside these colonized spaces. So I'm starting to put together an argument of my own at this point. I've got my two artworks and my argument is starting to emerge. It's time to start writing. Now, all of this work has happened in notes, in thinking, but I haven't yet started to structure my essay or to think about how I might actually pitch this essay towards an art journal. So I need to start thinking about how I will write, what kind of language I will use, how I go about doing this. So I go back to the question again, and I find that I've got to demonstrate writing techniques. I've got to use thick description. I've got to show not just what's on the surface of the work, but the depth of it. I've got to show all the things that surround it, that contextualize. I've got to critique these works. I've got to also explain my rationale for selecting them. I think I've got that reasonably together. But I've got to think again about why these artists help me think about what's on the horizon, what the future might be. I've got to give evidence from the artworks themselves, and I've got to think about how they complement and contrast with each other. And I've got to present a clear argument. My argument has to talk about these two works and how they help me think through the future. Sounds like a lot of work, a lot of things to do in very few words. So I need to start drafting it up and making sure that every word that I use is critical and important and points towards this bigger picture of contemporary art helping me think about the future. Okay, so that was how I would begin to write an essay. You've got another step, which is that your essay has to be written for a particular art journal. Now, usually when I write for an art journal, I have the journal will contact me and say, okay, we want you to write about this. You're kind of having to do it in reverse. You're saying, okay, I would like to write about these works in this context. Which journal can I take that to? And so next week I'll introduce you to the journals, and I'll also talk a little bit more about how to caption images. You'll notice some of my captioning in this talk has been correct and some has been incorrect. And I'll talk a little bit more about that next week. Okay, in the meantime, your first step is to start really thinking about which two artworks you think you could put side by side to help you think about the contributions that contemporary art can make to the way that we understand and consider the future.